Let's have a chat about risk and risk assessment. And I bet you guys can't wait, can you? You lucky little chaffinches. First of all, I want to take the concept of risk and I want to break it into two groups before we get into the real details here. And the first group I want to talk to you about is the notion of real risk. Okay, and when we're participating in sport, physical activity, there are things that are genuinely possible risks for you. And you know, you're not going to be too surprised by this. When we play sport, we can suffer an injury. We can, let's give an example, we can experience a strain, which of course is a muscular injury, or we might experience a sprain, which is a ligament injury, for example. Or, you know, we might bash our head in rugby or fall from the trampoline or land awkwardly in gymnastics, and we might suffer a concussion. Those are real things that could happen, and the whole point of that is what we need to do there is we need to mitigate that risk. Okay, we need to mitigate that risk, and by mitigate I mean make the tendency for these things to happen to be lower, and I'll talk to you about those things in a moment. But I also want you to be aware that in sport and physical activity there are things that we consider to be perceived risk. Okay, where in reality the risk is not that high. So let me give you a couple of examples, although we're not going to take them any further today. What about falling when abseiling? Now you might be thinking, well, hang on a second, what if you haven't got a rope? Well, I'm making an assumption here that before you go abseiling, you have got a harness on, you've got a rope on. It's not actually possible. It's like going on a roller coaster, isn't it? To an extent, like theoretically, it feels dangerous, and it's like, ooh, I'm going fast, I'm going up and down and upside down, but ultimately, it's super safe. I know someone's going to say there have been accidents. I'm aware of that. What about this one? What about drowning when kayaking? Okay, now, yes, the risk is there. It's possible that it could happen, but if we take these mitigation steps and we wear a life jacket and we stay in our depth and we don't go down ridiculous white water and so on and so on and so on, generally the risk is not there. It's just a perception of that risk. But these things are real risk. These could genuinely happen. Now, the thing I would just say about the two examples I've given here, of course, if they were to actually happen, then the danger would be quite high. You know, you could drowning and falling from a rock. I mean, those are going to damage your health, right? But the point is, they're not going to happen. We get the sense of risk, but it's actually not that real. Now, that's all well and good. Let me introduce you to a few environments I reckon you might be roughly familiar with. This here, or at least I'm going to say today, is a swimming pool. Okay, swimming pool. This here, let me get the next one in. This is some kind of indoor sports hall. So I'll just call this a sports hall. And by the way, I hope you like my drawings. I spent some time. This one here is like a fitness center or a gym. Okay, so fitness center or a gym. And this one here, is, we call this an artificial pitch, right? So this is an artificial pitch. I like my fog in this one, you've noticed. Artificial sort of 3G, 4G type environment. And finally, this one here is an outdoor pitch. So it's let's call this a grass pitch. Okay, so let's call this some kind of grass pitch. Now, the reason I've brought these in front of you is that what I'm going to go through now in terms of strategies to reduce risk, I want you to potentially apply them to these 5 different environments. I'll mention them as we go, but ultimately you need to be able to apply them to those different environments. But what I do want to do here, folks, just to be crystal clear, is I want to talk about strategies that we can use in sport and physical activity to mitigate. Strategies to reduce risk. I mean, that literally defines what mitigation means. To reduce risk and severity of injury. Okay, and severity of injury. So what can we do to make sure that, that we've got this real potential risk of someone could get injured? Well, how can we minimize that? And I want to break it down ultimately into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 groups to count them quickly there. So over here, group 1, we could consider protective clothing and equipment. Okay, let me do it like that. I'm just going to put equip. Okay, so we could consider protective clothing and equipment. What do we mean by this? Well, that could be padding. Think about things like shin pads and shoulder guards and various things. Head guard, for example. We could be talking about shields. I'm thinking particularly about something like a gum shield would be an excellent example. What about environments where cushioning happens. Now, obviously, if we just pause there a second, things like gum shields are going to be really relevant, like here for hockey, for example. Something like cushioning could be really helpful on these netball posts, which are on here, for example. Okay, we can get the idea that those would be relevant. We've got cushioning, any kind of, you think about mats, crash mats, this kind of environment would be really good. What about something like a harness? Okay, maybe for some indoor trampolining, we use a harness, for example. And what about in the swimming pool? We might use things like floats and buoys, okay? So we can use that sort of protective clothing and equipment. But I want you to focus on padding and shields, and think of almost like a helmet or a head guard as a kind of shield. You might want to include that there, but it kind of also mixes into number 2, which I'm going to talk to you about now. And number 2 is clothing and footwear, and really appropriate clothing and footwear is what we're talking about here. The right appropriate clothing, or the right footwear and clothing should help to reduce the risk and severity of injury. So think about environments where we might have some kind of spikes or studs. I mean, our outdoor pitch is a really good example, but would we use studs on here? Yes. Would we use studs here and here and here and even here? I mean, there are some artificial surfaces that you can use studs on. There aren't that many, but the answer is no. Okay, so studded boots, but of course it helps slipping when you're on a wet grassy surface. What about for that 4G or that 3G pitch? What about Astro shoes? Helping with grip, and they're really useful. Another one I think is nice here is the idea of wicking clothing. By wicking, we mean clothing that will, sort of technical clothing that will remove moisture away from the skin, and it prevents us getting prevents us carrying too much fluid in our clothing, but it also means once we stop, we don't get really cold because the clothing is not very, very cold. And on the other side, what about layers? Okay, using layers that can then come off in cold environments. And again, if we've got our 2 outdoor environments here and here, we've got the idea here of sort of like a base layer might help in very wintry conditions in the UK, for example. But don't forget about things like gloves. If you're doing things like weightlifting, that kind of thing could be useful. Let's look at number 3. Make this a nice sort of lilac-y purple. Number 3, what we're going to look at, we're looking at lifting and carrying of equipment. Lifting and carrying. I'm just going to leave that there. Lifting and carrying. I'm talking about the safely moving equipment. So let's just remind ourselves, someone who's lifting something heavy, let's say a 5-a-side goal in an AstroTurf, they need to bend their knees. They need to hold a straight back. Maybe they need to have somebody to carry the other end, that kind of thing. But also, I mean, it's a real super important point, but people should follow guidelines. If you're lifting something heavy, let's talk about football goals or netball posts or something like that. People should follow the guidelines of how that's done. And if we are in a gym and we are doing some kind of bar work or whatever, don't forget the notion of a spotter. If someone's lifting some heavy weights, they can have a spotter. A spotter is someone who's there to sort of grab the weight in case of emergency. That's a nice one to consider. Let's go green for number 4 down here. Number 4, we are talking here about maintaining hydration. All right, and it's a fairly simple point, this one, guys. Drink water. Okay, that's what performers should be doing. Now, which of these environments might that be kind of riskiest in? Let's have a look. So we've got drink water up here. Well, I would sort of highlight the swimming pool here. One of the things that's kind of weird about the swimming environment is you get very, very sweaty inside the water. You get very hot. You're working hard, but you don't necessarily notice it. The thirst level seems to be quite different. Therefore, having water available near the pool is important. We tend to have it here. We tend to have it here. We tend to have it here. We tend to have it here, don't we? Just don't forget that one. It's kind of important. I mean, it's no different, but I just want to maybe mention that point. So there's number 4. Let's go to number 5. We'll do this one in white. Number 5, what have we got here? We've got always participate in a warm-up and cool down. Okay, we look at this elsewhere in our studies, but of course this can really help to reduce the tendency for injury. Okay, so it helps to prevent injury, or I suppose it could help to reduce the severity too, but also I think this is a really important one. It helps to prevent DOMS. Don't forget about DOMS, delayed onset of muscle soreness. It's not an injury in its own right. It's kind of normal if we do very, very strenuous work, but it can be limited by doing, for example, a cool down. Now let's finish this off right up the middle with number 6 here. We're talking about, oh damn it, there's actually 7. No, I screwed it up. We've got the idea of following rules. I didn't leave myself any space either. So if we follow the rules, it down arrow reduces risk. Okay, so we're less likely to suffer some kind of dangerous incident, and it reduces down arrow foul play. So following the rules helps with protection. And where the hell am I going to put number 7? I'll go for sort of a purple. I'll go over here. What was that noise I just made? Number 7. I want to finish off here. I mean, it's probably one of the most important ones that I nearly forgot, and that is that there needs to be a suitable level of competition. I'll just put comp. Okay, suitable level of competition. And who should performers be performing against? People of the same age, perhaps. I don't want to get sort of too sort of detailed in this, but one could argue people of the same gender. Certainly around puberty and beyond seems to be sensible, and also of kind of skill level. You can imagine, for example, that the thing is, if it was just age based, think about something like cricket or baseball, really hard ball traveling fast. Even if you're elder, even if you're an adult and you haven't played that before, it's kind of useful to realise there's this rock hard bit of cork coming at you at 90 miles an hour and could hit you on the bonce. Therefore the skill level is also worth considering there. So those are the strategies. Make sure that you can apply them to our environments. That is the lot of us.